This is Criminal Interrupted, and today's episode covers a case that shook not only the music world, but also the wider public conscience. It's a story about betrayal, power, and devastating consequences of unchecked celebrity culture. A story that forces us to confront how systems failed to protect the most vulnerable. Ian Watkins was once the frontman of Lostprophets, a Welsh rock band that rose to international fame in the early 2000s. To millions of fans, he was a charismatic performer with a powerful voice. But behind the stage persona was a man committing crimes so horrific that when they came to light in 2013, they left the world stunned. This episode will examine how Watkins was able to hide in plain sight, the systematic failures that allowed his abuse to continue, and the lasting impact on the survivors and their families. Before we begin, a content warning. This episode discusses child sexual abuse and exploitation. Please listen with care and take breaks if you need to. If this subject matter feels overwhelming, it may be best to skip this episode. Ian David Carslake Watkins was born on the 30th of July 1977 in Merthyr Tydfil, Wales. He grew up in Pontypridd. His parents divorced when he was young, and he was raised primarily by his mother and his stepfather. Those who knew him as a child often described him as intelligent, creative, and musically inclined. He developed an early fascination with music, learning drums and guitar before eventually focusing on vocals. He was also incredibly charismatic. Watkins attended Halton High School, where he met future bandmate Mike Lewis. The two bonded over their shared love of American rock and metal bands, and they began experimenting with music together. By his teenage years, Watkins was already immersed in the South Wales alternative scene, playing in local bands and dreaming of a career in music. He later studied at the University of Wales in Newport, where he gained a first-class honours degree in graphic design. Watkins continued to cultivate both his artistic and musical ambitions, and it was during this period that the foundations of the Lostprophets began to take shape. In 1991, Ian Watkins and Mike Lewis formed their first band, a metal band called Aftermath, where they rehearsed in a shed in Watkins' garden. The band only played 2 live shows before disbanding, but it marked the beginning of Watkins' journey into music. After Aftermath, Watkins and his guitarist, Lee Gaze, created a new project called Fleshbind, inspired by American hardcore punk. Watkins played the drums, and the band managed several live performances, even opening for Feeder in London. But when their vocalist left, the group dissolved. Watkins had asked to take over as singer, but when that request was denied, he and Gaze decided to move on, forming a new band they called Lostprophets, spelled Lostprophets, a more stripped-down, back-to-basics project. At the same time, Watkins was drumming for another hardcore band, Public Disturbance, which also included Mike Lewis. In May 1997, Lostprophets made their live debut alongside Public Disturbance, with Watkins stepping into the role of frontman. By 1998, he left Public Disturbance to focus entirely on the newly renamed Lostprophets. The band's momentum grew quickly. Their debut album, The Fake Sound of Progress, was released in 2000, and by the following year, they were playing major shows, including a pivotal performance at the Cardiff Coal Exchange in December 2001. Watkins later described that night as a turning point, saying it was the moment the local scene truly recognised them. Over the next decade, the Lostprophets became one of UK's most successful rock exports. They released 5 studio albums: The Fake Sound of Progress, Start Something, Liberation Transmission, The Betrayed, and Weapons. They toured extensively across Europe and the United States, appearing at major festivals like Reading and Leeds. Watkins also collaborated with other artists, including Hoobastank in 2003 and The Blackout in 2007, further cementing his presence in the alternative rock scene. Outside of music, Watkins occasionally took part in charity work. On New Year's Eve in 2008, he performed at a fundraising concert for the Kidney Wales Foundation, motivated by his mother's need for a kidney transplant. Publicly, he presented himself as a charismatic frontman and even a figure of generosity. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. As the years went on, Watkins grew increasingly distant from his bandmates, spending much of his downtime in Wales, while the others lived in Los Angeles. Tensions escalate, and bassist Stuart Richardson later recalled that disagreements even turned into physical altercations when Watkins failed to show up for scheduled performances. As Lostprophets' fame grew, so did Ian Watkins' self-destructive behaviour. Behind the scenes, he was spiraling into heavy drug use, particularly cocaine and methamphetamine. Friends, colleagues, and even fans would later describe him as increasingly erratic, paranoid, and detached from reality. By the late 2000s, Watkins' drug abuse was no longer a hidden secret. Reports suggest he was using cocaine daily, and methamphetamine became a regular part of his life. These substances fueled reckless behaviour, clouded his judgment, and deepened a sense of invincibility that came with his celebrity status. In fact, it was a police raid on his home in 2012, initially carried out as part of a drugs investigation, that uncovered the digital evidence leading to his arrest for child sexual offences. In other words, his drug use was not only destroying him personally, but it also became the thread that unravelled the horrific crimes he had been concealing. By 2010, disturbing reports about Ian Watkins were beginning to surface. Police received information that he was supplying drugs to minors. Some argued this was simply to fund his own escalating addiction. By then, he was reportedly using cocaine, crack, methamphetamine, and heroin. But others suggested something more sinister, that Watkins was deliberately surrounding himself with vulnerable young people, lowering their inhibitions and exploiting them. The police took these allegations seriously. In 2010, they raided his home in Pontypridd, seizing laptops and mobile phones. Initially, they were looking for evidence of drug dealing. What they found instead was far worse. Evidence of crimes so disturbing that even seasoned investigators were shaken. On his devices, police uncovered indecent images of children, extreme pornography, and videos that documented Watkins' abuse of underage fans. Court records later revealed that some of these victims were as young as 16 years old, and that Watkins used both his celebrity status and drugs to manipulate and exploit them. The material also showed that he was in contact with women who were willing to facilitate the abuse, including discussions about infants. These revelations exposed the full extent of his predatory behaviour. So now we'll go through the crimes that he initially gets charged with. Just another warning, we'll go into explicit detail about his crimes to young children. First off, Count 18. In March 2007, he met a young girl known as TT, whose name was changed in court documents for their own protection. TT was a 16-year-old girl and was a virgin at the time he met her. He got her to dress in a schoolgirl outfit, and then he videoed them having oral, vaginal, and anal sex. He also asked her if she enjoyed being an underage slut. He also urinated on her face and then told her to drink it. Then we've got Count 19. In August 2008, he meets KJ, another fan of his and aged 16 years old. Again, he films them having sex, and she's also seen snorting a white powder. Then we've got Count 31. Watkins was found to be in possession of 90 indecent photos of children, and their age ranges between 2 and 14 years of age. 45 of those images were level 4. In the UK, they have a grading system. The 5-point scale, established by the Sentencing Advisory Panel for England and Wales and adopted in 2002, is known as the SAP scale. And I'll explain the levels to you now. Level 1. Nudity or erotic posing with no sexual activity. Level 2. Sexual activity between children or solo masturbation by a child. Level 3. Non-penetrative sexual activity between adults and children. Level 4. penetrative sexual activity between children and an adult. Level 5, sadism or bestiality. So 45 of those images were level 4, and 2 of them were level 5. Then there's count 32, where there's videos and images of extreme pornography. 22 images of them were bestiality, including oral and vaginal sex with dogs. Now we'll move on to other evidence, where 2 women will present him with their children. First, Watkins meets B in 2011. B at the time was only 19 years of age, and B had an infant who was just 10 months old. In March and April of 2012, the 2 of them have in-depth discussions and conversations about the sexual acts that they are both going to inflict upon B's infant son. And this leads B and Watkins to actually meet physically at the Copthorne Hotel in Cardiff. On March 21st, Watkins texted B saying, "Come down this weekend and we can F him up again." B responds, "Tell me if you want to get your dick in our boy. This is just a 10-month-old baby." B also talks about getting her son high on methamphetamine. Then there's the 2nd and 3rd of April. B and Watkins meet again, this time at the K West Hotel in London. They record what happened that night on video. B gave Watkins her baby that particular evening so he could rape him. He was going to rape him orally and anally. During this period, B is encouraging him actively throughout the encounter. Then she, as a mother, gives the baby oral sex and even puts his hand on her vagina. Watkins masturbated to the infant, and these depraved acts were all caught on camera. B also texts Watkins a message on May 24th, which says, "The boy is ready to be abused." On August the 2nd, Watkins messages B and says, "I think we've gone easy on him so far. Time to teach him and make him learn to love it." I know I've said this a few times already, but I want to reiterate that this is a 10-month-old little boy. Watkins and B then met at the Maldron Hotel in Cardiff, and then on September the 9th, B sends Watkins a photo of her orally raping her son. Now we have the case of Watkins and P, who is also a mother. These 2 began communicating in August 2012. P was 24 years old at the time of her sentencing. Watkins and P were speaking about moving in with each other. Watkins messaged her and said, "If you belong to me, so does your baby." P replies, "Understandable, a mother-daughter slave duo worshipping you." He replies back, "That's all she will know, a life of filth." P and Watkins also discussed how she intended to share his penis with her daughter. She said, "The good thing about babies is to put anything in their mouth and they'll start sucking it." The subsequent communication planned more depraved activities on this little girl, including forcing her to engage with animals and to give her drugs. Watkins referred to the little girl as "my little fuck toy." The judge in this case says, "That sums up how you regarded her, not as a human being, but simply as a sexual object there for your pleasure." Watkins went on to say that if she was whored out, fat old men would pay thousands. He also said that she needs to know that mummy and daddy don't love her. She's just there to make us come. P took pictures of her child's sexual parts and sent them to Watkins. P also went on to penetrate her daughter's vagina with her finger and sends those photos to Watkins, also saying that she can't wait for Watkins to stretch her. On September the 12th, Watkins and P had a Skype call, and Watkins encourages P to engage in sexual acts with her child, such as inserting a finger into her vagina. P does that with apparent enjoyment, and Watkins was masturbating throughout this. We then get to October 2nd, and these 2 meet again at the Travel Lodge in Philly, and on October 23rd, they meet at the Radisson in Cardiff. What happened at these encounters were not recorded, but the evidence suggests that P took a child to these encounters. But P denied that this was the case. She said that she left her baby with somebody else. Hardly believable. Both of them pled guilty to conspiring to rape and conspiring sexual acts on this particular case, and that was counts 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17. They all relate to the abuse of this little girl by Watkins and P. Mr. Justice Royce said to both P and Watkins, "You, Watkins, initiated and orchestrated the appalling abuse, but you, P, betrayed your daughter for your own selfish ends." The fact that Watkins and his accomplices filmed what they were doing shows to me that these weren't impulsive acts hidden in secrecy. It tells us something very important. They were fully aware of their actions. They weren't in denial. They weren't confused. They knew exactly what they were doing, and they wanted to preserve it. When someone chooses to record abuse, it strips away any illusion of accident or loss of control. It shows premeditation. It shows that the perpetrators were not only committing crimes, but taking pleasure in them, enough to want to watch them again, or to use them as currency in their predatory networks. Every image, every video, represents not just the moment of abuse, but a deliberate decision to exploit a child and then to memorialize that exploitation. And this is why the argument of remorse rings so hollow, because you cannot claim you didn't understand the gravity of your actions when you've gone so far as to document them. The act of filming itself is admission, an admission of intent, of awareness, and of gratification. For investigators, these recordings became crucial evidence, but for survivors, the knowledge that their abuse was recorded adds another layer of trauma, because it means their pain was not only inflicted in the moment, but turned into something that perpetrators could revisit. It is just another violation that echoes the act itself. Mr. Justice Royce also said that both B and P betrayed their children. They not only failed to protect their children, but they placed them directly in harm's way. It is impossible to overstate how despicable that is. Parenthood is meant to be the ultimate act of protection, of sacrifice, and of love. To betray that role so profoundly is beyond comprehension. These women forfeited the right to call themselves caregivers the moment they chose to hand their children over to a predator. Every child deserves safety, dignity, and unconditional protection. And when those who are meant to provide it instead become complicit in abuse, it is a betrayal that cuts even deeper. These mothers do not deserve the children they harmed, and their actions will forever stand as a reminder of how devastating misplaced trust can be. And to add another layer of it, as someone who struggles to have children themselves, it makes me so upset that some people can have children and just abuse that right. By the time the Crown Prosecution Service brought formal charges, Watkins faced a staggering list of offences. These include conspiracy to rape a child under 13, conspiracy to engage in sexual activity with a child, possession and distribution of indecent images of children, possession of extreme pornography, including bestiality, sexual assault of minors. These charges were unprecedented in their severity, not only because of Watkins' celebrity status, but because of the involvement of mothers who had willingly offered their children to him. When news of his arrest broke in December 2012, the reaction was one of disbelief. Lostprophets had been a hugely successful band, with millions of albums sold worldwide and a devoted fan base. Watkins had been a charismatic frontman, often described as stylish and magnetic. To many fans, the allegation seemed impossible. Watkins initially denied all charges. In court appearances throughout 2013, he pleaded not guilty, maintaining his innocence and attempting to convince those around him that he was being framed. His manipulative nature was noted by prosecutors, who argued that he had a history of persuading others to believe his lies. During this period, disturbing evidence continued to surface. Police revealed that Watkins had stored thousands of images and videos, some of which were graded at the most severe levels of child abuse imagery under UK law. There were also recordings of him engaging in sexual activity with underage fans, some as young as 16, often under the influence of drugs he had supplied. The prosecution also presented evidence of online chats and text messages between Watkins and his female accomplices, in which they discussed plans to abuse children, including infants. These communications were explicit and left little doubt about intent. There were also the many recordings of Watkins' depraved acts. In a dramatic turn, on the 26th of November 2013, Justice's trial was set to begin at the Cardiff Crown Court, Watkins changed his plea. He admitted guilt to 13 sexual offences, including attempted rape of a baby, conspiracy to rape a child, sexual assault of children, making and possessing indecent images of children, possession of extreme pornography. His 2 female co-defendants, B and P, also pleaded guilty to related charges, including aiding and abetting sexual offences against their own children. When sentencing came, both apparently expressed remorse. Once again, their remorse rang hollow, because genuine remorse is not something you discovered only once you are caught. Genuine remorse is stopping before the harm is done, protecting your children at all cost, and refusing to participate in abuse. What we saw in that courtroom was not the remorse of mothers who had suddenly realized the horror of their actions. It was the remorse of people who had been exposed, who could no longer hide behind secrecy. Their behavior is, in many ways, inexplicable. These women were entrusted with the most sacred responsibility to nurture and protect their children. Instead, they facilitated Watkins' crimes, betraying their children in the most profound way imaginable. No explanation, no excuse, can ever reconcile that betrayal. The sudden guilty plea meant that the trial did not proceed to full testimony, sparing jurors and the public from being exposed to most graphic evidence. However, the admissions confirmed the worst fears about Watkins' behaviour. On the 18th of December 2013, Watkins returned to Cardiff Crown Court for sentencing. The judge, Mr. Justice Royce, delivered a scathing statement saying, "I am satisfied that you are a deeply corrupting influence. You are highly manipulative. You are a sexual predator. You are dangerous. The public, and in particular young females and children, need protection from you." Watkins was sentenced to 29 years in prison, with an additional 6 years on licence, parole supervision. This effectively meant he would serve at least 2/3 of his sentence before being eligible for release, followed by strict monitoring. The 2 women were also sentenced to lengthy prison terms for their roles in facilitating the abuse. Former bandmate Mike Lewis expressed disbelief after the sentencing, saying, "I tried reading the judge's report. I couldn't even finish it. To think that somebody I grew up with, who had been friends with my entire life, whose mother I knew, and how close our families were. To even imagine him. I find it utterly unbelievable that he was capable of doing those things." After his sentencing in December 2013, Ian Watkins began serving his 29-year prison term at HMP Wakefield in West Yorkshire, one of the UK's highest security prisons. Known as Monster Mansion, it houses some of the country's most dangerous offenders. In the years that followed, Watkins continued to make headlines from behind bars. Reports emerged of him attempting to contact fans, boasting about his crimes, and even trying to smuggle contraband into prison. These stories reinforced the perception of him as manipulative and unrepentant, even after conviction. In August 2023, Watkins was attacked by fellow inmates and taken hostage inside Wakefield. He survived that incident, though it highlighted the risks he faced as a high-profile sex offender in prison. Then, on October 11th, 2025, Watkins' story came to a violent end. He was attacked with a knife inside HMP Wakefield and fatally injured. Emergency services were called, but he was pronounced dead at the scene. He was 48 years old at the time. 2 men, aged 25 and 43, were arrested on suspicion of murder, and a police investigation is still ongoing. The prison service confirmed the incident, but declined to comment further while inquiries continue. Watkins' death has once again thrust his name into headlines, but it does not erase the devastation he caused. For survivors and their families, the impact of his crimes will last far beyond his life and his notoriety. Ian Watkins' death in prison in October closed the final chapter of his life, but it does not close the story. His crimes left scars that will never fully heal. I want to be clear, the children harmed in this case were victims of unimaginable betrayal, but they are also survivors. That word matters, because survival is not just about enduring what was done to them. It's about the courage to keep living, to heal, and to reclaim their futures in spite of the harm. When we talk about child abuse, it's easy to focus only on the horror of the crimes, but we must also recognize the resilience of those who live through it. They are not defined by what was done to them. They are defined by their strength, their survival, and their right to be seen as whole human beings beyond the abuse. So while Ian Watkins' name will always be tied to depravity, the legacy we should carry forward is not his. It belongs to the survivors, the children who endured, who continue to endure, and who deserve every ounce of protection, compassion, and justice that society can give them. Thank you for listening.